The sky over the American Pacific Northwest is ablaze. At precisely 5:09 a.m., 3 high-altitude EMP detonations take out satellites. The entire West Coast's power grid goes dark. Phones drop out. Smart cars become expensive bricks. That's just the start. The real nightmare is about to begin. Dozens of cruise missiles tear across Puget Sound, striking airfields, data centers, and power substations. Swarms of drones buzz in from the Pacific, jamming radars and identifying targets with terrifying precision. As Seattle reels, embedded Russian commandos launch coordinated attacks on ports and critical infrastructure. They have been in place for weeks, if not months, blending in, disguised as dock workers. Chinese amphibious forces join the attack, offloading troops and armor straight from retrofitted cargo vessels. Real-time footage is beamed across the Pacific courtesy of surveillance balloons hovering high above the battlefield. The unthinkable has happened. The Homeland has been hit. Day 0, 4:30 a.m. Eastern Standard. It starts like any other morning. Operators at North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, go about their duties. Then someone notices faint blips appearing on radar screens monitoring the Pacific. A moment later, U.S. infrared satellites spot flashes of intense heat, the unmistakable signature of missile launches. Computers race to identify them, and the answer comes almost immediately. Cruise missiles and short-range ballistic missiles, not just one or two, but a whole wave of them. And they're all headed for the continental United States. The missiles haven't been launched from enemy territory. They're coming from submarines lurking deep in the Pacific and cargo ships masquerading as civilian vessels in international waters. No one understands that this is not just a missile barrage. It is the opening move of a full-scale, coordinated Russo-Chinese invasion. The target is Seattle. The objective is far more ambitious than destruction. They intend to seize territory. They want to force the U.S. Navy out of the region for long enough to establish a foothold. They want maritime dominance. A successful landing means they can establish a forward base on U.S. soil. Alarms echo throughout NORAD. The Cheyenne Mountains Ops Center is alive with klaxons and frantic activity. This is not a drill. Secure phones start ringing. Encrypted networks flood with traffic. 1,600 miles away, in Washington, D.C., the president is jolted awake. Within minutes, Secret Service agents are moving him toward a secure bunker. Aides brief him every step of the way. It's a fluid situation. Things are changing rapidly. All anyone knows is that America is under attack. Just 7 minutes later, the response is already underway. Across the country, Air Force and Air National Guard units scramble under Operation Noble Eagle. This is the post-9/11 Homeland Air Defense mission, the goal to protect America's airspace. In Fort Worth, a pair of F-16s roar down the runway and into the dawn sky before their pilots are fully awake. All across the U.S., from Massachusetts to Hawaii, Ready Alert jets, F-15 Eagles, F-22 Raptors, and F-A-18s from Navy stations take to the sky within minutes of the warning. Radar controllers feed them targets as they race toward the threat. Their mission is straightforward: destroy incoming missiles and find whatever comes next. At the same time, NORAD and the FAA ground every civilian flight. It's a move not seen since 9/11, but this time the goal isn't to secure the skies after an attack. It's to clear them before the main fight begins. 4:45 a.m. The missiles begin to arrive. Off America's coasts, Aegis destroyers unleash interceptor after interceptor, swatting down incoming threats before they reach land. Over Florida, a Patriot battery defending MacDill Air Force Base locks onto a low-flying cruise missile. Seconds later, the sky over Tampa Bay erupts in a fireball. But not everything gets stopped. On the West Coast, the assault is brutal. Cruise missiles strike early warning radar arrays in Northern California, blinding parts of the defensive network just as commanders need it most. Further north, Joint Base Lewis McChord outside Tacoma, Washington, takes multiple hits. Runways are cratered. Aircraft operations grind to a halt. The port of Seattle is hammered by precision strikes, sending shockwaves across the waterfront. Minutes later, a massive explosion rips through the I-5 corridor south of downtown. An overpass crashes onto the freeway, paralyzing one of the region's most critical transportation arteries. But the missiles are only part of the assault. As emergency crews scramble to respond, a second threat appears. Drone swarms begin descending on the city. Their targets aren't military bases, they're communication hubs and emergency response centers, the key pieces of the infrastructure holding the city together. By the time the first wave is over, roughly 40 enemy missiles have struck US soil. The damage is huge. An oil refinery burns, radar systems are blinded, and communication networks are pushed to their limits. But the strategic surprise fails. The United States is wounded, but not paralyzed. Key military installations remain operational. Command and control networks are still functioning, but aircraft are already in the air and forces are moving. With every passing minute, commanders gain a clearer picture of what they're facing. America is ready to strike back. Day 0, 5:30 a.m. Eastern Standard. As the scope of the attack becomes clear, control shifts to U.S. Northern Command. Inside its headquarters in Colorado Springs, commanders begin coordinating the largest homeland defense operation in modern American history. Then comes an order no American military officer has ever heard in real life: Defcon 1. The highest state of military readiness, the final rung on the escalation ladder. Fighter jets begin circling key strategic locations, while combat air patrols take station over Washington, D.C. and New York. Others guard NORAD's command facilities, Silicon Valley's tech hubs, and the nuclear missile fields scattered across the Midwest. But the real battle is in the Pacific Northwest. The forces available to stop the invasion are limited. Elements of the 7th Infantry Division, Air Force personnel at Joint Base Lewis McChord, a handful of Army Special Forces teams. They're supported by aircraft from nearby naval air stations. For the moment, they're the only line of defense, and the stakes could not be higher. America's worst fears are confirmed. Chinese-Russian troops have landed at Elliott Bay in Seattle. Amphibious armored vehicles begin rolling off converted cargo ships under a protective umbrella of drones and missile fire. Russian Spetsnaz teams sabotage bridges and ports. Transportation bottlenecks worsen. Offshore, the threat continues to grow. A Chinese carrier task force has pushed into the eastern Pacific, supported by long-range bombers and destroyers fanning south toward California. The strategy is classic bite and hold. Capture a key urban center, cut off access to the Pacific, and use the chaos to push for a negotiated endgame, hopefully before the full weight of American firepower arrives. Off the West Coast, Coast Guard cutters and Navy littoral combat ships surge into position, forming a defensive cordon along critical coastal approaches. What began as a localized emergency is now a coordinated maritime defense effort. Inland, things are tense. At Fort Bragg and Fort Campbell, the 82nd Airborne Division and the 101st Airborne Division are placed on 4-hour standby. Troops aren't deployed yet, but they're no longer waiting at normal readiness. Equipment is being checked and orders are being prepared for rapid movement. Every layer of the U.S. military is now engaged or preparing to engage. The president addresses the nation from a secure bunker. Hashtag US under attack and hashtag World War III begins to trend on social media platforms. Videos of F-22s screeching over Seattle go viral. Images of destruction at ports and collapsed infrastructure flood profiles and platforms. And then the cell network goes down. 8 a.m. As the US begins to wake up, military intelligence builds a clearer picture. What seemed like a terror attack is actually coordinated, multi-domain, trans-Pacific occupation. Enemy forces are launched from submarines off the coast of Alaska, ships located near Hawaii, and mid-range bombers operating from the Kurils and Chinese-claimed islands in the South China Sea. A diversionary assault is already underway across the DMZ, with tens of thousands of North Korean troops surging south. Intelligence now shows the earlier exercises in the South China Sea and the Arctic weren't routine at all. They never were. They were bait. It was all part of a carefully planned plot to draw U.S. carrier groups away from the mainland at the critical moment. While that was happening, waves of cyber attacks crippled early warning networks, interfered with satellite feeds, and jammed critical communications. For a small but dangerous window, U.S. reconnaissance is effectively blind. It's just long enough for assault fleets to move closer undetected. Early indicators point to a coordinated axis of upheaval gamble, a bid to seize the Pacific and force American forces inland, fast and hard. But the advantage is short. Despite the scale of the strike, U.S. resilience holds. Continuity of government protocols snap into place. Deep buried command nodes at Cheyenne Mountain and Raven Rock stay online. Secure lines are rerouted. After the initial shock, the U.S. plans its response. As midday comes around, the Pentagon sees the bigger play. Enemy forces have captured Seattle. Naval movements suggest follow-on targets could include the California coastline or Alaska. It's time for the U.S. to flex its muscles. The Second Fleet races to strengthen the Atlantic coast against any secondary assault. On the Pacific front, the 3rd and 7th Fleets join up assets to initiate Operation Iron Undertow. It's a coordinated campaign to push Chinese and Russian forces out of U.S. waters and stop any further landings. F-35s peel off from carriers off San Diego and fly north. Below them, P-8 Poseidons move in slow, deliberate arcs through the Pacific. These sub-hunting predators sweep the oceans for anything that doesn't belong there. Farther back, B-52s at Barksdale and B-1s at Ellsworth fire up their engines, ready to deliver long-range standoff strikes against any amphibious command vessels that venture too close to the shore. On the ground, the response is just as fast. Army and Marine units speed up the coast to create a defensive ring around Seattle. Interstates are turned into convoys and staging corridors. Behind them, National Guard forces across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho fortify key routes. Civilians are evacuated from potential conflicts. The battle for Seattle and the Homeland has begun. Day 1. The last time America mobilized on this scale was after Pearl Harbor in 1941. Even then, the fight was oceans away. This time, there is no distant front. Seattle is occupied, and the West Coast is a battlefield. The president invokes the War Powers Act and declares a national emergency. Within hours, all 50 governors activate their Army and Air National Guard units. Nearly 325,000 Army National Guard soldiers and 105,000 Air National Guard airmen are in federal service. The nation's defensive backbone almost overnight. Citizen soldiers move to lock down bridges, power plants, and communication hubs and government buildings. In New York City, guardsmen dig in behind sandbagged positions overlooking the Hudson. In Washington, D.C., checkpoints multiply around the Capitol and the Pentagon, turning landmarks into controlled corridors. But in the West, it feels like another world entirely. In Portland, highways have become defensive lines. In Spokane, air defense batteries are positioned around airports. From Eugene to Bellingham, critical junctions are protected. Troops dig in and wait. Seattle, still on fire, has become a contested urban battle. Joint Base Lewis McChord, struck hard on the first day, remains overrun. U.S. units scramble to hold the line south of Tacoma. Civilian evacuations continue, often moving through corridors that are under threat from drone strikes. The enemy's intent is becoming harder to miss. Dig in, fracture reinforcements, and buy enough time to establish a logistical lifeline across the Pacific. The federal government moves fast. It begins to seize industries under the Defense Production Act. Fuel is diverted to military convoys. Civilian airliners are stripped for transport runs. Munitions and drones rolling off factory lines around the clock. Leadership is rushed to secure sites like Cheyenne Mountain and Raven Rock. Congress still meets through encrypted video links, their faces flickering on screens under concrete and fluorescent light. It seems like public resolve has managed to hold. For now. Near the attack zones, tensions begin to spill over. From San Diego to Salt Lake, displaced civilians fill up highways and shelters. Systems begin to reach breaking point. Curfews are put in place across 48 West Coast counties. Panic buying and looting breaks out. Stores are emptied in hours. Food, fuel, and other essentials vanish. Society is collapsing there. Day 2. America is a nation of gun lovers. 393 million citizens own firearms. Across the country, law enforcement agencies coordinate with militias and gun clubs to create rapid response units. The message is simple. hold the line where you are. With the initial shock contained, the US military pivots to fortifying what remains of its coastal and northern defenses. The priority zones are the Pacific Coast, the Alaska-Aleutian Corridor, where Russian long-range patrols continue to test the edge of US radar coverage, and the southwest border, where intelligence warns of infiltration attempts through cartel-run smuggling routes. The Olympic Peninsula is sealed off into a hardened military zone. Coastal artillery batteries are set up to cut off the Puget Sound. Navy SEALs and Marine recon teams push into the San Juan Islands, sweeping for trips, drop points, and anything that shouldn't be drifting in the channels between them. Along the coast, Marines camouflage anti-armor positions into the terrain. Cliffs, overpasses, bridges, and large stretches of highway all become home to javelins and TOWs. Helicopter units run constant patrols along Highway 1, swooping low and fast over the coastline, watching for anything trying to break the main defenses. Major West Coast cities issue partial evacuation orders. Seattle is under duress. Meanwhile, some of the most recognizable cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and even Anchorage prepare for the worst. In the east, the 10th Mountain Division moves from New York to the Carolina coast. The 82nd Airborne remains on standby. Paratroopers sleep when they can, waiting for the call to move out. Over 250,000 active duty troops are deployed on both U.S. coasts, supported by hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles. AWACS, drones, and satellites piece together the battlefield. Everyone holds their breath. While the battle for Seattle grinds on in the north, the enemy opens up a second front. As fog clings to California's central coast, a diversionary amphibious force makes its way toward Vandenberg Space Force Base. Fast boats skim low over the water, helicopters almost touching the waves beneath them. It's an attempt to split attention, to create force hesitation, and probe for any weakness along the west coast. But this time, US forces are ready. Air defense teams light up the gloom in sudden streaks of fire. The sky fills with Avengers and FIM-92 Stinger interceptors. Some of the helicopters never make it inland, turning into fireballs over the surf. Farther out, AC-130 gunships circle under tight F-35 escort, turning the approach lanes into a kill box before the landing force can properly form. On the dunes, 75th Ranger Regiment elements lay in wait, concealed positions in the sand and scrub. When the enemy hits the beach, chaos breaks out. Mortars hammer the shoreline. Machine guns rake the surf line. It only takes 2 hours for the fight to be over. As the wounded are medevaced off the beach, surviving enemy personnel are hauled into military custody. Early debriefs begin to paint a different picture. Seattle is the base of the attack. It's a deliberate attempt to capture a major American city, sustain it from the sea, and turn it into a long-term pressure point. The enemy wants to fracture logistics, attention, and morale across the West Coast. Smaller landings might continue to probe the shoreline, though. But Seattle is the main goal. U.S. Northern Command responds in kind. The 1st Marine Division shifts toward the Los Angeles Basin. The 3rd Infantry Division moves west from Georgia, armor loaded onto rail and sealift, the long logistics chain coming to life at wartime speed. Across the Pacific Front, air defenses tighten. Patriot and THAAD batteries surround Los Angeles and San Diego. Combat air patrols circle over the Pacific, providing continuous, overlapping coverage. Carrier strike groups, Carl Vinson, Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, fan out across the Pacific, hunting 2nd and 3rd waves. Additional carriers head toward Hawaii and Guam to cut off enemy reinforcements. But America isn't alone. The alliances begin to lock in. Canada is the first to fully commit operational support to its neighbor. CF-18s form combat patrols out of Vancouver. NATO radar assets arrive from Europe, extending the surveillance net across the Pacific approaches. Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force destroyers join up with U.S. naval forces to begin clearing and holding the Central Pacific. The war is no longer local. Over 500,000 American troops are now operating across the country. active duty, guard, and reserve, alongside all 3 Marine divisions and numerous armored formations. In the air, nearly 1,500 fighter jets fill American skies, carrying out relentless air patrols. At sea, more than 100 warships and 60 submarines form a hard perimeter around the continent. It's an iron ring that grows denser by the hour. Missile defense systems blanket critical areas, while NORAD's integrated network oversees an unbroken picture of the battle space. The surprise attack has failed. Seattle still holds, but it's cut off and worn down under sustained pressure. Reinforcements are no longer getting through. The sea lanes are closing behind the attackers. What was meant to be a foothold is starting to look like a trap. Having blunted the initial assault and stabilized the defensive lines along the west coast, the American strategy pivots. It's time to hit back. The Seattle enclave is holding, for now. Enemy forces are isolated behind U.S. lines, hundreds of miles from reliable reinforcement. And out at sea, the situation is starting to shift decisively. The home field advantage begins to show. American logistics surge. Rail lines, highways, depots, and forward bases all feed the front at a speed the attacker cannot match. What looked like a sudden, overwhelming strike is now running into the reality of sustained industrial scale. The Russo-Chinese gamble starts to look different. It looks like an overextension. Drawing on the lessons from the Pacific campaigns of the Second World War, the U.S. shifts from containment to systematic pressure. Not just to hold the line, but to compress the battle space, then erase it. Once that's done, they can turn to the Pacific and turn it into a graveyard for any additional forces. At dawn, America unleashes hell. B-2 Spirit bombers from the 509th Bomb Wing fly out of Whiteman Air Force Base. Their mission is to decapitate the enemy's floating command structure off the west coast. They slip into the airspace over the Pacific like ghosts, nearly invisible to radar. They release precision JDAMs directly onto 2 Chinese and Russian command and control ships. Far below them, the B-1B Lancers from Dias AFB swoop in from the southern approaches, fast and low. At range, they release their payloads in a coordinated wave, sending long-range anti-ship missiles racing across the ocean's surface toward escort groups and transport formations trying to hold the perimeter. Virginia and Los Angeles-class attack submarines are already in position near Hawaii and the Channel Islands. Cruise missiles erupt from the deep, striking at naval assets and the improvised offshore logistics platforms that had begun sustaining the Seattle lodgment. Off the coast, the USS Zumwalt, long criticized for its teething problems, has its moment in the fight. As enemy craft speed toward the Oregon coastline, the Zumwalt unleashes hypervelocity rounds, shredding hulls before they ever reach the surf. The enemy is outgunned, outflanked, and increasingly out of options. By midday, the enemy crafts are on fire. Ship after ship appears on infrared feeds as burning silhouettes. Some break formation, others are dead in the water, and a few have already turned back in full retreat. The carefully assembled invasion fleet begins to break under sustained pressure from multiple directions. An enemy carrier takes repeated hits and loses maneuvering capability. It drifts into a slow, fatal list as its escorts peel away in disarray. Elsewhere, transport vessels carrying heavy equipment for a follow-on landing near Coos Bay are struck before they can close the distance. The shape of the battle has changed completely. The enemy Pacific Fleet is no longer advancing, it's scattering, burning, and trying to survive. Despite the naval collapse offshore, a remnant of the enemy plan makes a more desperate move. In a last attempt to salvage momentum, a reinforced enemy Marine brigade lands at Huntington Beach, just south of Los Angeles. Landing craft and low-profile hovercraft roar through the surf under covering fire. Explosions along the boardwalk, smoke rolling inland as troops surge onto the sand and push into the coastal strip. For a brief, chaotic moment, they gain ground. A beachfront hotel is seized, and enemy signals flare from its upper floors. Along the Pacific Coast Highway, armored elements begin to move out, testing the depth of the penetration. It looks like a second beachhead might hold, but the illusion of success quickly vanishes. The 1st Marine Division, based just 60 miles south, moves first. They are fast, coordinated, and overwhelming. California National Guard units reinforce from behind as M1A1 Abrams elements roll in from the north and Stryker formations seal off the eastern approaches. Above it all, Apache gunships work the corridor at low altitude while AC-130s orbit offshore, turning every attempt at movement into a tracked, collapsing pattern of fire and counterfire. By nightfall, the incursion has been crushed. What remains is isolated and rapidly being swept up block by block. A few desperate holdouts hole up in parking garages and a CVS store, but Marine fire teams nullify them by morning. Drones capture the aftermath and relay it across command channels. Silent boardwalks, abandoned positions, and zip-tied prisoners under guard. The footage is clinical, detached, already being processed into reports rather than headlines. It's the first time since 1814 that a foreign ground force has raised its flag over a major American city, and it doesn't last long. The aftermath, Week 1. With the Homeland secured, defense switches to offense. Ohio-class submarines, already positioned in the Pacific and Atlantic, receive launch authorization. From concealed locations, they begin a coordinated wave of Tomahawk strikes against key military infrastructure across the enemy coalition's Pacific-facing network. Naval facilities, radar sites, airfields, and logistics hubs stretching from the South China Sea to the Russian Far East are obliterated. At the same time, B-52 formations operating from bases in Guam, Diego Garcia, and the continental United States conduct long-range strike missions. Their loads vary by objective. Precision munitions for hardened targets, alongside PSYOP packages warning enemy civilians of what their leaders have caused and urging them to surrender. U.S. Cyber Command goes on the attack. Across multiple theaters, enemy communications go offline. American-backed insurgent groups within the enemy's borders have a renewed sense of ambition. Meanwhile, Special Operations Forces conduct operations in the San Juan Islands and along the Olympic Peninsula. They wipe out remaining observation and infiltration points. In Alaska, Army units eliminate isolated Spetsnaz teams attempting to hide out in the brutal, remote terrain. Step by step, the enemy's ability to coordinate at range begins to erode, and for the first time since the opening of the conflict, the initiative is no longer contested. It is being actively driven outward. The tide of war has finally turned. The Seattle front is now effectively isolated and unsustainable. Reinforcements are cut off. Ammunition is running low. Aerial resupply is no longer possible due to American air dominance. Small groups of enemy troops begin surrendering, while others pull back into hardened positions, bracing for a major assault that never comes. Behind the scenes, messages move through intermediaries. The enemy is giving a hard ultimatum: stand down or face consequences. So far, the nuclear arsenal remains untouched. So far. Week 2. With the West Coast stabilized and the Seattle invasion contained, the United States shifts into its next phase. It tries to establish a sustained defense, full industrial mobilization, and the dismantling of any remaining threats. The Homeland still carries the marks of the opening strikes. Ports are damaged, bridges are twisted metal, storefronts scarred by fire, but the momentum has changed. The focus is no longer survival, it's control. In a gutted warehouse on the edge of Tacoma, a Marine sergeant counts his remaining ammunition. 3 magazines. He radios command. More is coming, he's told. Hold the line. He does. Seattle remains contested but fully surrounded. Joint Base Lewis McChord has been retaken, and cleanup operations push through Tacoma's industrial corridors, clearing what remains of the early fighting. Behind the front lines, planners aren't taking any risks. They begin to create a hardened perimeter that extends far beyond the continental United States. North America will become a fortress. Reinforcements flood into Guam, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. The Panama Canal is placed under full military protection in coordination with Panamanian authorities. Logistics can move uninterrupted between oceans. Across the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, surveillance and patrol craft watch sea lanes and close off any remaining gaps in coverage. The Rio Pact is activated, widening the war into a full security framework. Canada, already fully committed, reinforces Vancouver hardened against further coastal pressure. Nova Scotia is included in North Atlantic patrol routes. Mexico deploys elite counter-cartel units to secure its northern border. It also coordinates with U.S. formations operating in California. Farther south, Brazil and Colombia provide bases for reconnaissance flights and naval refueling. At home, the Space Force begins to prove its worth. Quick-launch surveillance satellites replace those lost in the opening skirmishes. GPS and comm satellites are re-established. DARPA's satellite-hopping prototypes are fast-tracked. An entirely new layer of observation now orbits Earth. Along U.S. coastlines, a mesh of over-the-horizon radar and blimps stretch from Baja to British Columbia, knitting together a continuous early warning picture. Civil air patrol units add low-altitude coverage, while civilian drone operators expand informal coastal observation under coordinated guidance. Local maritime communities, fishing fleets, private boaters, coastal patrol auxiliaries feed real-time observations into regional command centers. It is not just the military anymore. Week 3. At a Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan, the last F-150 rolls off the line at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, the assembly configuration has changed. What comes next isn't a truck. America's industrial might has kicked into high gear. Across the country, assembly lines are reconfigured almost overnight. Civilian production slows as factories pivot toward military contracts. Aerospace plants that used to focus on commercial orders begin turning out drones, munitions, and aircraft components at a relentless pace. Defense manufacturers expand to round-the-clock operations as production targets climb higher with each week. The shipyards follow. In Virginia, Maine, and Mississippi, dry docks are filled with damaged vessels returning from the Pacific. Repair crews work around the clock, patching hulls, replacing systems, and pushing ships back into service as quickly as possible. Older reserve vessels are removed from storage and modernized with modular missile pods and AI-based threat tracking. Meanwhile, new construction accelerates under emergency wartime authorities. The manpower surge is just as dramatic. Mechanics, engineers, linguists, cyber experts, logistics planners are all called into service first. But even before compulsory drafts are implemented, recruiting stations see lines forming outside their doors. Veterans re-enlist. Reserve units begin to swell. All across the nation, training bases operate at maximum capacity. And unlike many nations that have fought prolonged wars, the United States still possesses its greatest strategic advantage: distance. Energy and agriculture stays at stable levels, thanks to the geographic luck of an intact homeland. There's no famine or fuel shortage, but Americans adapt. Fuel is rationed, non-essential travel declines. Communities organize local support drives. Victory gardens appear in backyards and vacant lots, not because they're strictly necessary, but because they symbolize something larger. The invasion shocked the country. The response is beginning to transform it. Meanwhile, the Pentagon's black-budget labs are thrust into the spotlight. Projects that had spent years hidden behind classified budgets became urgent wartime necessities. Experimental drones appear over the battlefield. Advanced AI systems sort through mountains of data, helping commanders target strategic facilities. The innovation surge isn't limited to government facilities either. Silicon Valley pivots almost overnight. Startups find themselves solving military problems. Logistics algorithms optimize the movement of fuel, ammunition, and personnel across thousands of miles. Software engineers race to bulletproof communications networks against disruption. Cybersecurity teams work around the clock patching vulnerabilities as quickly as they appear. NATO's collective defense commitments are now fully engaged. Allied ships join patrols across the Atlantic while European air forces expand deployments to North America and Arctic bases. Joint exercises become joint operations. Intelligence sharing is almost instantaneous. Across the Pacific, America's allies move from support to partnership. Australia and Japan emerge as critical partners of the coalition effort, extending surveillance coverage and protecting sea lanes. At the same time, economic pressure begins to mount. Sanctions spread far beyond the initial coalition. Countries that once tried to remain neutral start distancing themselves from the aggressors. Trade contracts expire. Financial networks tighten, diplomatic relationships fray. The economic fallout of the war begins to hit places far from the battlefield. The enemy thought they could break America. They were wrong. Week 4. A teacher in Portland tapes a hand-drawn map of the Pacific Northwest to her classroom wall. She doesn't take it down. Schools have reopened, but things are different. Emergency drills are as routine as fire alarms. Security is tighter everywhere. College campuses see a surge in ROTC enrollment. The war has become part of everyday life. Flags appear in windows that have been bare for years. The conflict has changed the country. Defense planners remain convinced that a cornered enemy is a dangerous enemy. Intelligence analysts continue searching for signs of a retaliatory strike or a covert operation. Across the country, Patriots, THAADs, Aegis Ashore batteries, and NASAMS systems ring every major city. Radar screens glow through the night. Every approach to the continent is monitored and tracked. And in the Pacific Northwest, the war's most visible scar remains. Seattle is no longer in danger of falling, but it isn't at peace. The city remains under tight control, surrounded by security and constant surveillance as recovery and clearance operations continue. The only thing not returning to normal is the defense posture. That's permanent now. Fortress America is a reality. By the end of Week 4, a month into the enemy's ill-fated attack, American forces are still building momentum. Supply lines stretch across the continent. Factories run day and night. Allies continue to rally. The war may still have chapters left to write, but the direction of the story isn't in doubt. Whatever comes next, negotiation, collapse, escalation, or uneasy peace, the initiative now belongs to the United States. The attackers are no longer advancing, they're reacting. The invasion of Seattle was supposed to shock the world, and it did, but not in the way its architects intended. They expected fear. Instead, they found resolve. They expected division. Instead, they found unity. They expected America to shatter from a war on its own soil. Instead, they awakened the full weight of a nation. The enemy fleet was broken, their elite forces overrun. The attack changed the world in a matter of hours, but the response changed it for years. Military historians would spend decades analyzing the operation, searching for the moment it went wrong. Some will point to the overextended supply lines, others to the failure to secure maritime superiority. Others still will highlight the belief that a limited occupation could survive against the industrial, geographic, and political weight of North America. What began as a bid to shift the balance of power became a case study in strategic overreach. A campaign that won headlines, seized territories, and captured the world's attention, only to discover that holding those gains was harder than taking them. The hardest part of invading America wasn't getting in, it was getting out. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.